The Dancing Plague of 1518, A Tale of Madness and Shadows. Part 1. The First Step. The July heat clung to Strasbourg like a suffocating shroud. Dust devils pirouette through the narrow, cobbled streets, and the air tasted of desperation. For months, famine had gnawed at the city's belly. Crops withered. The Rhine ran low. Superstition festered in the shadows, whispering of divine wrath. It began on a Tuesday, near the Butcher's Guild Hall. Frau Trophia, a housewife with hollowed cheeks and eyes like cracked porcelain, stepped into the square. She wore a threadbare dress, her feet bare. No one noticed her at first, just another soul drowning in the city's misery. Then she swayed, a slow, unsteady motion. Her arms lifted, trembling as if pulled by invisible strings. Frau called a fishmonger. "Are you ill?" She didn't answer. Her feet scraped the stones, scritch-scratch, scritch-scratch, a rhythm without music. Her gaze fixed on nothing, vacant as a doll's. By dusk, she was still dancing. Not the joyful leaps of a festival, but a jerking, mechanical horror. Her heels bled. Her breath came in ragged gasps. People gathered. Women crossed themselves. Men muttered of demons. One baker tossed her a crust of bread. She danced over it, oblivious. When the moon rose, she collapsed, twitching in the dirt. They carried her home. By dawn, she was back in the square, dancing. Word spread, a curse, a sign. The city held its breath. Part 2. The Rhythm of Ruin. The Fish Gas Alley had become a theater of the damned. For 7 days and 7 nights, Frau Trophia's skeletal figure had swayed, shuffled, and stumbled across the same patch of sun-baked cobblestones. The initial curiosity of neighbors had curdled into a thick, cloying dread. They watched from darkened doorways and cracked shutters, their faces pale smudges in the gloom. The relentless scrape-scrape thud of her bloodied feet on stone was the heartbeat of a nightmare that wouldn't end. Trophia was a ruin. Her once sturdy frame had withered, draped loosely in a sweat-soaked, torn shift. Her eyes, wide and glassy, saw nothing of the physical world. They were fixed on some internal horror, a writhing serpent only she could perceive, a chorus of discordant bells ringing only in her skull. Her lips moved soundlessly, forming words lost in the rasp of her breath. Beneath the ragged hem of her dress, her feet were a pulped mess, skin flayed raw, toenails torn, leaving dark, sticky smears that baked black in the July sun. Flies buzzed lazily around the wounds. Yet, the terrible compulsion drove her onward, an engine fueled by agony. She long ceased to be Frau Trophia, the wife of Hans Trophia. She was simply the dancer Dash, a grotesque monument to an inexplicable doom. Her neighbor, Marguerite, stood nearby, a jug of water trembling in her hands. She'd been Trophia's sole anchor in the early days, braving the growing fear to press a damp cloth to the woman's burning forehead, to trickle water between her cracked lips. Marguerite's own face was etched with exhaustion and pity. Her husband, Klaus, a barrel-chested cooper whose hands could bend iron hoops, stood helplessly beside her, his face a mask of impotent rage. "She can't go on, Klaus," Marguerite whispered, her voice cracking. "She'll die right here on these stones." A tear tracked through the grime on her cheek. Klaus grunted, his knuckles white where he gripped his belt. The priests came. They splashed her with holy water, shouted Latin at her. She just danced, harder dash dot. He spat onto the cobbles. "Devil's work, that's what it is. Nothing else makes sense." As if summoned by his words, Marguerite flinched. A strange tremor ran through her arm, causing water to slosh over the rim of the jug. She frowned, shaking her head slightly. "Just tired," she murmured, more to herself than Klaus. But Klaus saw it, a flicker in her eyes, a sudden vacancy that hadn't been there a moment before. Then, Marguerite's head jerked back, her spine arching unnaturally. A low groan, guttural and alien, escaped her throat. "Marguerite." Klaus grabbed her arm. Her skin felt feverish, yet clammy. Her eyes rolled back, showing only the whites. "No," Klaus breathed, the word a punch to his own gut. "No, no, no." Marguerite's body convulsed, a violent spasm that tore her from his grasp. Her limbs snapped out in stiff, angular motions. The water jug shattered on the stones. Then, horrifyingly, her feet began to move. Not towards Klaus, but towards Trafia. Her steps were jerky, staccato, devoid of Trafia's eerie, exhausted rhythm. They were desperate, panicked lunges. Slap, slap, scrape against the cobbles. A new, discordant counterpoint to Trafia's relentless shuffle. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. A woman shrieked. Another one. St. Vitus, save us. Marguerite stumbled the last few feet until she was level with Trafia. Her head lolled, then snapped upright. Her arms flailed wildly. And then she danced dash. Not with Trafia, but alongside her, trapped in the same invisible, malevolent current. Her movements were frantic, chaotic, a terrified bird beating itself against the bars of a cage. The sound of two sets of ruined feet slapping and scraping the stones filled the narrow alley, a grotesque duet of suffering. Klaus stood frozen, the world narrowing to the jerking, twisting figure of his wife. The woman who had kissed him that morning, who had mended his shirt, whose laughter had filled their small home, was gone, replaced by this marionette of torment. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the rising tide of panic. He took a step forward, hand outstretched. Marguerite, look at me. Fight it. His voice was raw, desperate. Marguerite's head swiveled towards him, her eyes wide, unseeing pools of terror. Her mouth opened in a silent scream as her body continued its violent, involuntary jig. She spun away, colliding with Trafia. The two women staggered, a tangle of limbs, before the invisible force righted them, forcing them back into their separate, hellish rhythms. Klaus sank to his knees, a sob tearing from his throat, lost in the growing cacophony of fear and the dreadful percussion of dancing feet. The Rathaus Council chamber stank of fear and sweat, thick enough to taste. Sunlight streamed through the high, narrow windows, illuminating swirling dust motes and the strained faces of Strasbourg's ruling elite. Master Goldsmith Hoffman, the Ammeister, paced before the heavy oak table, his velvet cap askew. Reports piled before him like accusations. 5 now. 5 confirmed. Master Schmidt of the Tanners Guild slammed a meaty fist on the table, making the inkwells jump. Trafia, Marguerite, the weaver's boy Jacob, old Frau Bauer the washerwoman, and young Stefan from the smithy, and whispers of others feeling the pull. The streets are boiling, Hoffman. We have riots brewing alongside this madness. Master Reinhardt, a scholar with thinning hair and a perpetually pinched expression, adjusted his spectacles. Panic is the enemy, Master Schmidt. We must apply reason. This is not demonic possession, despite the theatricality. He gestured dismissively towards the window, from which the faint, unsettling rhythm of distant drums, or was it feet, could sometimes be heard. The exorcism attempt was ill-advised. Agitation worsens the condition. I made the Trafia woman near fly apart, muttered Master Fisher, the fishmonger representative, shuddering. But if not devils, then what? Poison? Some say it's in the rye bread. Ergot blight. Reinhardt shook his head, a picture of scholarly patience. Ergot poisoning causes convulsions, gangrene, hallucinations, yes. But not this, sustained dash, rhythmic compulsion to dance. No, the answer lies in the humors. Consider an unusually hot, dry summer. Famine weakening constitutions. Deep-seated melancholy festering in the populace after years of hardship. This creates an imbalance, an excess of hot, black bile heating the blood. The vapors rise to the brain. He tapped his temple, causing frenzy, delusion, and uncontrollable motor agitation. It's choriomania dash, a documented affliction. St. Vitus is often invoked, but this is a natural disease of the mind and body. Hoffman stopped pacing, his eyes sharp. Documented? A cure. Reinhardt nodded, relieved to be on solid ground. Indeed, her Ammeister. Historical accounts, in Aachen, centuries ago, similar events. The physicians of the time understood. Restraint is fatal. It traps the corrupted humors, intensifying the frenzy. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. The afflicted must expel the imbalance. They must dance it out. Vigorous, sustained dancing. It purges the overheated blood, releases the noxious vapors, restores equilibrium. They must dance until the fever breaks. A heavy silence fell. The counselors exchanged dubious glances. Encouraging the very thing that was destroying people? It felt perverse. It's counterintuitive, Hoffman murmured, rubbing his temples. But logical, based on medical authority, Reinhardt pressed. Confine them. They die in chains. Let them dance freely, under controlled conditions, with music to guide the rhythm. They purge the sickness. We provide the stage, the musicians. We contain the spectacle, calm the populace by showing we are acting with reason, not superstition. We offer the cure. Hoffman looked out the window. The distant murmur of the terrified city was a constant pressure. He needed a solution. A visible, decisive action. Reason, not fear. Order, not chaos. Reinhardt's theory, bizarre as it seemed, offered a framework, a path forward endorsed by scholarship. It was better than helpless prayers or the bloody chaos of witch hunts. Very well, Hoffman declared, his voice gaining strength. We act. Clear the corn marked. Build a sturdy wooden stage. Hire musicians, the best pipers, drummers, fiddlers. Pay them double. Let the afflicted dance. Let them sweat out this poison. He turned to his clerk. Issue the proclamation. The dancing ground opens at sundown. The corn market, usually bustling with merchants hawking grain and produce, was eerily transformed. Stalls were hastily dismantled, carts hauled away. In the center, carpenters hammered together a large, rough-hewn platform. The air thrummed with uneasy anticipation and the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of construction. A thick cordon of watchmen, faces grim beneath their helmets, held back a swelling crowd. Fear hung heavy, mixed now with a morbid, horrified fascination. As the sun dipped low, casting long, distorted shadows, the musicians took their places on one corner of the stage. They were professionals, but their faces were pale, their hands unsteady. They tuned lutes and pipes with trembling fingers, the discordant notes adding to the atmosphere of dread. The drummer tested his instrument, a hollow, ominous boom that echoed across the square. Then they came. Guarded by watchmen who kept a careful, fearful distance, the afflicted were guided towards the stage. Trophia shuffled, a ghost barely tethered to earth, her eyes vacant. Marguerite jerked and spasmed, Klaus trailing helplessly a few paces behind, his face a mask of anguished fury. Young Jacob, the weaver's apprentice, whimpered with every forced step, his limbs twitching violently. Old Frau Bauer mumbled incoherently, her steps a slow, agonized shuffle. Stefan, the blacksmith's son, moved with terrifying, unnatural power, his muscles straining against the compulsion, sweat pouring down his contorted face. A collective gasp rose from the crowd as the five were led onto the platform. The sight was pitiful and terrifying. The setting sun painted them in hues of blood and gold. The musicians looked to the Rathaus balcony, where Hoffman stood flanked by counselors. He gave a sharp nod. The music began. A sprightly, familiar folk tune, the kind played at harvest festivals. It sounded grotesquely cheerful against the backdrop of suffering. For a moment, the dancers seemed confused, swaying slightly on the spot, their individual rhythms disrupted by the imposed melody. Then, the drummer picked up the beat. Boom, 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 boom. Trophia's head snapped up. A shudder racked her frame. Her shuffling feet suddenly aligned with the drum. Scrape, 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 thud. Marguerite's frantic jerks synchronized into sharp, staccato steps. Slap, slap, slap. Jacob let out a choked cry as his body surrendered. His movements becoming a fluid, horrifying parody of grace. Frau Bauer began a slow, rhythmic circle. Stefan stomped his heavy boots in time with the drum, shaking the planks beneath him. Thud, thud, thud. The musicians, encouraged, played louder, faster. The piper's trill became shrill, the fiddle sawed frantically, the drumbeat intensified into a driving, hypnotic pulse. The effect was monstrous. The five dancers weren't just dancing, they were amplified dash. The music didn't soothe, it fueled them. Their movements became more vigorous, more synchronized, a single, terrifying organism writhing on the stage. Trophia, near-death moments before, seemed to find a reservoir of ghastly energy. Stefan stomped with terrifying force, cracks appearing in the wooden planks beneath his boots. The crowd watched, mesmerized and horrified. Then, a young woman near the front clutched her temples. The drums. She moaned. There, inside me. Her body stiffened. Her eyes glazed. With a guttural cry, she burst through the cordon and stumbled onto the stage, her limbs already twitching into the frantic rhythm. Moments later, a middle-aged man near the baker's stall felt his foot tap, then his leg jerk. He tried to resist, stumbling backwards, but the pull was undeniable, magnetic. He lurched forward, joining the swirling mass on the stage. 6. Then 7. Hans the baker stood frozen near his stall, a warm loaf of rye bread forgotten in his hands. He'd been the first witness to Trophia's first step. He'd watched the horror unfold. Now, witnessing the council's cure, a cold, sickening dread flooded him. This wasn't containment. This was propagation. The stage was a beacon, the music a siren song, calling the sickness forth. He saw Stefan, the blacksmith's powerful son, looking less human by the second, a puppet of muscle and bone. He saw Marguerite, her face a rictus of agony beneath the frantic movement. And then, Hans felt it. A faint tremor in his left foot. A soft tap against the cobblestone. He looked down, his blood turning to ice. His foot, independent of his will, was tapping in perfect time with the drummer's relentless beat. Tap, 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 tap. He tried to lift it, to command it to stop. It resisted. The tapping grew firmer, louder, syncing perfectly with the thud-thud-thud, shaking the stage. The frantic melody of the pipes seemed to coil around his thoughts. A strange warmth spread up his leg, a prickling, restless energy gathering in his muscles. It wasn't pain. It was compulsion dash. A terrifying urge, rising not from his mind, but from his very sinews and bones, to move dash, to join that dreadful rhythm. The warm loaf slipped from Hans's suddenly nerveless fingers, landing with a soft thud on the dusty cobbles. He stared at it, uncomprehending for a moment. Then his gaze snapped back to the stage, to the whirling, jerking figures silhouetted against the dying sun. The music swelled, filling the corn marked, filling his skull. His foot tapped faster, harder, a drumbeat of doom against the stone. A strangled sound escaped his throat, part gasp, part whimper. The square blurred. The anxious faces of the crowd, the imposing facade of the Rathaus, the stalls, all faded into a smudged background. Only the stage remained sharp, horrifically vivid. The dancers, moving in their terrible, irresistible rhythm. And beneath it all, the insistent, undeniable percussion of his own betraying foot, hammering out a chilling counterpoint on the cold, unyielding stone. Tap, tap, thud. Tap, tap, thud. The rhythm of ruin was inside him now. Part 4. The heart of the frenzy. The air in the corn-marked hung thick and heavy, saturated with the stench of sweat, urine, vomit, and the iron tang of blood. What had begun as a desperate attempt at a cure had metastasized into a grotesque, open-air theater of suffering. The July sun beat down relentlessly, turning the packed earth of the square into a furnace floor. Dust clouds, kicked up by hundreds of shuffling, stomping, lurching feet, choked the air, catching in throats and coating the faces of dancers and onlookers alike with a grimy mask. Klaus, the mercenary, leaned heavily on his halberd, his knuckles white. His initial cynical detachment had evaporated, replaced by a cold dread that coiled in his gut. He'd seen battlefields, the chaos, the screams, the stink of death. This was different. This was a slow, rhythmic unraveling of sanity played out to a maddening, never-ending tune. The musicians, faces drawn and gray with exhaustion, played on. Their fingers bled onto the strings of fiddles and the pipes of shawms, their eyes glazed over, trapped in the same relentless current as the dancers. One drummer had collapsed an hour ago, his place taken by a terrified apprentice whose rhythm was already faltering. The dancers. In the swirling mass, individuals became fleeting phantoms. Frau Trophia still danced. Her initial solitary sway had become a jerky, skeletal parody of movement. Her eyes were vacant pools, sunken deep in a skull-like face. Her feet, wrapped in bloody rags, left crimson smears on the dust. She no longer seemed human, more a marionette animated by some unseen, malevolent force. A low, continuous moan escaped her cracked lips, lost beneath the music and the thudding of feet. Marguerite, Trophia's neighbor, the second victim, stumbled nearby. Her dance was wilder, more desperate, punctuated by sharp cries that sounded like a trapped animal. Her once fine dress was torn and soiled, her hair a tangled nest. She clawed at her own arms, leaving red welts, as if trying to tear the compulsion out of her skin. Hans the baker, his massive frame, once a symbol of strength and sustenance, was now a liability. He lumbered in agonizing circles, his face purple with exertion and heat. Tears streamed down his cheeks, cutting tracks through the grime. He gasped for air, each breath a rattling wheeze. He wouldn't last the day. Sister Agnes, the nun's presence was a chilling counterpoint. Her wimple was askew, her habit torn at the hem. Her movements weren't wild like Marguerite's, but possessed a terrifying, rigid precision. Her eyes, wide with terror and fervent prayer, were fixed skyward, her lips moving silently. It was as if her body was a battleground between divine supplication and infernal possession. She danced with a terrifying, pious intensity. The witnesses. Around the fringes, the horror unfolded for those still untouched. Father Jacob, he moved through the outskirts of the throng like a ghost himself, clutching his stole and vial of holy oil. He'd given last rites to 3 dancers that morning alone, young men whose hearts had simply burst. He knelt beside a collapsed woman, her chest barely rising. As he murmured the prayers for the dying, her hand shot out, fingers clawing at the air, her legs twitching in a frantic, spasmodic rhythm even as life fled. He crossed himself, his faith shaken to its core. Was this truly God's will? Or had the devil truly claimed this square? Elsbeth, the midwife, her makeshift aid station, little more than a blanket spread near the horse trough, was overwhelmed. She wiped brows with vinegar-soaked cloths, tried to force sips of water between clenched teeth, bound bleeding feet. But it was futile. Dancers she momentarily revived would stagger back into the maelstrom within minutes, driven by the insistent beat. She saw the broken bones, ankles twisted at impossible angles from falls on exhausted legs. She saw the vacant stares, the utter depletion of spirit. "It's not in their blood," she muttered to herself, watching Hans gasp. "It's in their minds. The music, the fear, it's eating them alive." The crowd, the initial morbid curiosity of the townsfolk, had curdled into terror and revulsion. Mothers clutched children tightly, turning their faces away. Men muttered prayers or curses. Some wept openly. Rumors, amplified by fear, swirled like the dust devils in the square. The devil walks among them, playing an unseen fiddle only they can hear. It's the wrath of St. Vitus. We offended him with our lack of piety during the famine. Look, the musicians. Their eyes glow red when the sun sets. Their demons sent to lure us. The poisoned rye, it's making them see demons that drive them to dance. It's catching. Just looking at them too long makes your feet itch. The councils panic. High above the square, in the ornate council chamber of the Kammerspiel building, the air was thick with a different kind of heat, the heat of panic and impotent fury. Lord Mayor Jacob Sturm von Stermeck paced like a caged bear. The reports filtering up were catastrophic. Casualties, at least 15 dead in the square that day, from heart failure, stroke, dehydration, or injuries sustained in falls. Dozens more lay unconscious or dying. Spread, new cases were no longer confined to the Kornmarkt. Reports came in of outbreaks near the tanneries by the Riverill, and even within the walls of a nearby convent. The plague was escaping its pen. The musicians, the guild masters, were in revolt. Their men were collapsing. They demanded the music stop, now dash. The people, a mob, terrified and angry, was gathering outside the Kammerspiel, shouting for action, for protection, for someone to blame. Enough. Von Stemek slammed his fist on the heavy oak table, silencing the cacophony of arguments. This cure, this abomination, we sanctioned. It has made things tenfold worse. We poured oil on the fire. He turned to the city physician, Heinrich. Your humor's theory. You're overheating blood. Look out that window, man. Does that look like purging? It looks like damnation. Heinrich, pale and sweating, stammered. The theory is sound. Lord Mayor. Perhaps the purging requires more intensity? Stronger music? More dancers? A collective gasp went around the table. Another councilman, his voice trembling, spoke up. More? Are you mad? We must stop it. Cease the music. Force the dancers to desist. Lock them away. And how? Von Stemmeck roared. With what men? Klaus's mercenaries are barely holding the perimeter as it is. Would you have us cut down our own citizens in the street? Women? A nun? The emperor would have our heads. The church would excommunicate the city. Silence descended, heavy and suffocating. The relentless thump of the drums from the square below vibrated through the stone floor, a mocking counterpoint to their paralysis. The breaking point. As dusk began to paint the sky in bruised purples and oranges, a new horror unfolded in the corn market. Sister Agnes, her eyes still fixed on heaven, suddenly threw back her head and let out a shriek that cut through the music, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror and despair. Her rigid dance dissolved. She began to spin wildly, arms flailing, her voice rising in a torrent of guttural, nonsensical syllables that sounded like no language known to man. Spittle flew from her lips. She tore at her wimple, ripping it free, revealing close-cropped hair plastered to her skull with sweat. A collective moan rose from the crowd. If a bride of Christ could fall so utterly to the madness, what hope was there for anyone? At that moment, near the edge of the square, a desperate mother tried to pull her teenage son, whose feet had begun to twitch uncontrollably, away from the spectacle. Look away, Stefan. Don't watch, she pleaded. But the boy's eyes were glued to Sister Agnes's horrifying display. A shudder ran through him. His twitching intensified. Then, with a cry that was half sob, half exultation, he wrenched free of his mother's grasp and stumbled forward, his limbs already jerking into the rhythm of the dance. He was the 100th victim that day. Nightfall. The council finally gave the order. The music stopped. Abruptly. The sudden silence that crashed over the corn market was almost more terrifying than the noise. For a heartbeat, the dancers faltered, confused, like puppets whose strings had been cut. Frau Trophia swayed, blinking as if waking from a dream. Marguerite stopped clawing herself, looking around with dazed incomprehension. Hans collapsed to his knees, gasping like a landed fish. But the silence lasted only seconds. Then, the moaning began. A low, guttural sound that rose from hundreds of throats, a sound of profound agony, frustration, and an unbearable, itching need. Those who had collapsed tried to rise, their limbs trembling violently. Those still standing began to sway, then shuffle, then stamp their feet on the silent earth. A rhythmic clapping started, slow at first, then faster, more insistent. Someone began to hum a broken fragment of the forbidden tune, then another, then a dozen. Without the musicians, the dancers became their own orchestra of despair. The clapping, the stomping, the humming, the moaning, it coalesced into a new, raw, primal rhythm, more unsettling than the professional music had ever been. It was the sound of the plague finding its own voice, proving it needed no outside force to sustain its terrible momentum. Under the emerging stars, the corn market descended into a vision of medieval hell. Fires were lit around the perimeter by Klaus's men, casting long, leaping shadows that made the dancers look like frenzied demons. The air vibrated with the awful, self-generated beat. Father Jacob sank to his knees in prayer, tears streaming down his face. Elsbeth covered her ears, the sound of hundreds of feet pounding the earth resonating in her bones. Klaus tightened his grip on his halberd, his eyes scanning the writhing shadows, wondering what fresh nightmare the dawn would bring. The dancing plague was no longer just happening in Strasbourg. It was Strasbourg, and its hunger was far from sated. The council's failed cure had only unleashed its true, terrifying power. The whispers now weren't just rumors. They were screams carried on the hot summer wind, reaching every corner of the beleaguered city. It's coming for you next. Dash, the weight of stone, desperate measures are taken. The dancers are forcibly removed to a remote shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus. A perilous journey begins, testing the limits of the afflicted and their guards. New characters emerge, a skeptical scholar searching for a rational explanation, and a charismatic flagellant preacher who sees the plague as divine judgment. The line between salvation and damnation blurs on the road to Savern. Part 5. The Descent into Madness. The silence in the corn-market was worse than the music. For 3 days, the relentless drone of pipes, drums, and fiddles had woven itself into the fabric of Strasbourg's nightmare. Now, with the musicians finally dismissed, some collapsing from exhaustion, others fleeing in superstitious terror, an unsettling quiet descended. But the dancing didn't stop. It transformed. The air filled with a new, chilling symphony. The sharp crack of bare feet slapping bloody stone, the wet thud of bodies colliding, the ragged, rhythmic gasps of hundreds straining for air they couldn't afford to waste, the low, guttural moans escaping cracked lips. It was a percussive heartbeat of despair, raw and primal. The afflicted, eyes glassy and unfocused, moved with a terrifying autonomy. They clapped their bruised hands, stomped their ruined feet, groaned in time with their jerking limbs, creating a dissonant rhythm that pulsed through the square like a feverish pulse. Inside the Rathaus, the air was thick with panic sweat and the sour tang of failure. The once authoritative council of 21 resembled cornered animals. Mayor Heinrich von Ratzenhausen paced like a caged bear, his jowls trembling. They dance, without music. He bellowed, slamming a fist onto the oak table. What devilry is this? We gave them their outlet. We followed the physician's wisdom. Dr. Franz, the local physician whose overheated blood theory had led to the musicians, shrank back. The humors, perhaps they are excessively agitated, or maybe your theory is horse-stung, spat Alderman Klausbauer, his face pale. Look out there. It's not illness. It's possession. It's a curse. He gestured wildly towards the window overlooking the macabre spectacle below. The groans and slaps seemed to grow louder in response. Rumors, previously whispered in alleys, now erupted openly within the council chamber and flooded the terrified city. The Jews, they poisoned the well at the Goosefoot Inn. Their dark magic compels Christians to dance. The witches, old Greta was seen muttering over Frau Trofia's doorstep. They danced to the tune of the Black Sabbath. St. Vitus, we neglected his feast day. He spins us in his wrath. We must appease him. Divine punishment. A gaunt, wild-eyed preacher named Brother Anselm stood on a barrel near the cathedral, his voice raw. Repent. Strasbourg has wallowed in sin, lechery, greed, gluttony. This dance is God's scourge. Dance until your hearts burst for your transgressions. Tension crackled. A mob, fueled by Brother Anselm's fire and the pervasive fear, cornered old Solomon the cobbler near the tanner's gate. Stones flew. Witch's accomplice, they screamed. Only the swift intervention of a few level-headed guards prevented bloodshed. The city teetered on the brink of chaos, the dancing plague now threatening to ignite a firestorm of violence. Into this maelstrom arrived 2 figures representing humanity's desperate dual response to the inexplicable. Master Gerhard von Basel arrived at the city gates just past noon, his fine traveling cloak already dusty. Beside him, wide-eyed and clutching a heavy leather satchel, walked his young apprentice, Lena. Gerhard, a physician of some renown summoned by a desperate courier days earlier, had expected fever, perhaps ergot poisoning. He was unprepared for the stench, sweat, blood, excrement, and something metallic, like fear made tangible, that hid him blocks from the corn-market. The sound reached him next, not music, but that terrible, rhythmic cacophony of suffering. By the bones of Hippocrates, Gerhard breathed, stopping dead. His clinical gaze swept the square. He saw not dancers, but bodies in catastrophic failure, muscles spasming beyond endurance, joints dislocating, skin shredded, feet pulped. He saw dehydration, starvation, utter exhaustion. This is not hysteria, Lena, he murmured, his voice tight. This is systemic collapse. Observe the cyanosis around the lips, the dilated pupils, unresponsive to light, the tachycardia visible even from here. What force drives them past the body's absolute limits? Sister Clara, arrived quietly an hour later, slipping through the tanner's gate. Her simple gray habit stood out amidst the grime. Sent by her abbess from the convent of St. Magdalene, she carried a basket of clean linen, vials of soothing lavender and chamomile oil, and a small, well-worn crucifix. Her gentle face, usually serene, crumpled at the sight. She didn't see clinical symptoms. She saw souls in torment. She saw Frau Trophia, now a skeletal wraith, her movements slower, weaker, but still ceaseless. She saw Marguerite, her hair matted with blood from a scalp wound, weeping silently as her body jerked. She saw Hans, the baker, his face a mask of agony, his once powerful frame trembling violently with each forced step. Both Gerhard and Clara sought answers, wielding different tools against the same abyss. Gerhard, granted reluctant access to the edge of the dancing ground by wary guards, focused on Hans. With Lena assisting, they managed, with the help of 3 strong men, to briefly drag the semi-conscious baker from the throng. Gerhard's examination was swift, clinical. Pulse racing, erratic. Temperature dangerously elevated. Eyes rolled back. He diagnosed excessive sanguine humor and prescribed immediate bloodletting. Lena held a brass bowl as Gerhard made a swift incision in Hans's arm. Dark blood flowed. Hans groaned, his thrashing momentarily lessening. Gerhard felt a flicker of hope. But as the blood pooled in the bowl, Hans's eyes snapped open, wide with panic. A guttural sound escaped him, and with a surge of unnatural strength, he wrenched free, stumbling back towards the dancers. The rhythmic groans seemed to pull him like a magnet. He rejoined the macabre waltz, the blood dripping down his arm, adding another dark stain to the stones. Gerhard watched, his face ashen. It offered no respite, he whispered to Lena. The compulsion overrides the body's weakness. This defies Galen, defies reason. Nearby, Sister Clara knelt beside a young woman who had collapsed, twitching feebly. She wiped the girl's brow with a damp cloth infused with lavender, murmuring prayers. She offered sips of water mixed with a calming infusion of chamomile and valerian root. The girl's eyes flickered towards Clara, a fleeting moment of terrified lucidity. "Make it stop," she gasped. Clara pressed the crucifix into the girl's trembling hand. "Hold fast to faith, child. Saint Vitus, intercede for us." But even as she prayed, the girl's body began to convulse again, her limbs moving in jerky, involuntary arcs, forcing her back onto her ruined feet. The crucifix fell to the stones. Clara's prayers dissolved into silent tears as the young woman was swallowed once more by the relentless tide of movement. Her herbs, her comfort, her faith, they touched the surface but couldn't penetrate the depths of the compulsion. That night, the council reconvened under torchlight, the shadows dancing mockingly on the walls. The reports were dire. 17 dead in the corn-market that day alone. Dozens more lay unconscious, unlikely to rise. The plague was spreading. New cases were reported in the fishmonger's quarter and near the horse market. Master Gerhard presented his grim findings. No physical poison detected in samples of bread or water, no signs of common infection. His scientific tools were useless. Sister Clara, invited to speak, offered only a quiet plea for compassion and prayer, her eyes hollow with witnessed suffering. Brother Anselm's voice boomed from the doorway where he'd forced his way in. "God's wrath is upon you. You delay his judgment." Mayor von Ratzenhausen looked around the table at the faces etched with exhaustion and terror. The scientific solution had failed. The local physician was discredited. The city was fracturing. They were out of options. Desperation crystallized into a terrible resolve. "Enough," the mayor declared, his voice cracking. "We have consulted physicians. We have expelled the musicians. We have prayed. The affliction continues. Master Gerhard offers no cure. Sister Clara offers comfort, but no cessation." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "The people cry for action. Brother Anselm, though harsh, speaks a truth we cannot ignore. We must appease Saint Vitus. We must make pilgrimage." A murmur ran through the chamber. Pilgrimage? With dancers? Alderman Bauer nodded fervently. Yes, to the shrine at Savern. Saint Vitus is the patron invoked against the dancing sickness. We must take the afflicted to him, offer penance, seek his intercession. But how? Asked another councilman weakly. They cannot walk normally, let alone. They will dance. Bauer interrupted, his eyes gleaming with a frantic light. They must dance to the saint. It is the only way. We purge the city and seek divine mercy in one act. We organize them. We escort them. We take them the 30 miles to Savern, dancing their penance before St. Vitus. The proposal was madness, a death march disguised as devotion. Yet, faced with annihilation, the council grasped at it. Fear voted louder than reason. The motion passed. Orders were given. Gather the afflicted at dawn. Secure them with ropes if necessary. Find strong men and carts for the weakest. Prepare provisions. They would dance their way to salvation or oblivion. As dawn's first gray light crept over the blood-stained stones of the corn-market, guards moved through the exhausted, groaning throng. The pilgrimage had begun. Frau Trophia, a spectral figure now, was pulled roughly to her feet. She took one faltering step, then another, her skeletal frame swaying. Then, her legs buckled. She collapsed face first onto the cold stone, utterly still. A gasp went through the onlookers and the weary guards. Was this the end? Had the saint claimed her before they even began? For a long, agonizing moment, she lay there, a broken doll. Then, a tremor ran through her. A hand twitched. Slowly, impossibly, she pushed herself up. Her head lifted, eyes vacant yet fixed on some unseen point in the distance. With a shuddering gasp, she began to move again, not towards the city gates, but in a small, shuffling circle on the spot. The compulsion, indifferent to pilgrimage or purpose, held her fast. The guards exchanged horrified glances. They lifted her, tying her thin arms with rough rope to prevent her falling again, and propelled her towards the forming procession. Behind her, Marguerite, Hans, and hundreds more were herded like damned souls towards the Metzgerther gate. The sun rose, staining the sky the color of blood. The gates groaned open. The procession shuffled, stumbled, and jerked its way out of Strasbourg. The city watched, a collective breath held. They danced on, not to music, but to the relentless drumbeat of their own ruin, heading into the unknown countryside under a crimson sky. Ahead lay 30 miles of purgatory. Behind, a city prayed for deliverance, wondering if they had just cast their affliction out or unleashed it upon the world. The pilgrimage becomes a harrowing journey through the Alsatian countryside. Follow the desperate procession. The dwindling dancers push beyond human limits, the conflicted guards and attendants, Master Gerhard documenting the horror, Sister Clara offering futile comfort. Witness the reactions of terrified villagers along the route, the harsh realities of exposure and exhaustion, and the growing doubt about St. Vitus's mercy. Will Savern offer salvation, or just a different stage for the final, fatal dance? Part 6. The Road to Savern. Heat haze shimmered over the cobbled road to Savern as the dancers stumbled forward, bare feet bleeding on stones. Guards cracked whips, herding them like damned cattle. Sister Clara moved among the afflicted, pressing a water skin to Frau Trophia's cracked lips. The first dancer's eyes were vacant marbles, her body a marionette jerking to a tune only she heard. Dash, why won't you stop? Klaus hissed, darting from behind an oak to grasp Marguerite's wrist. Her skin burned. When he tried to force her still, she shrieked, a sound that sent crows exploding from the trees. Guards seized Klaus, but Sister Clara intervened. Dash, let him help me carry the fallen. Her voice left no room for protest. The forest of whispers. At nightfall, the procession camped in a beech grove. Dancers twitched in their sleep, limbs thrashing against roots. Master Gerhard knelt beside Hans, examining the baker's swollen, purple feet. The humors are not the cause, he muttered to Lena. See how their movements sink even without music? This is a sickness of the mind. Dash, passed like a spark. Lena pointed to Marguerite, now tracing symbols in the dirt. Tell that to her fever. Or him. She nodded at Carl, a fishmonger's son, whose dance ended abruptly when he crumpled mid-step, ribs piercing his lungs with a wet crutch. The guards rolled his body into a ravine. No graves for the cursed. One spat. Seven's hollow welcome. The shrine of St. Vitus loomed at dusk, its stone saints staring blankly as the dancers spilled into the courtyard. Father Anselm, the shrine's keeper, blanched. You bring demons here? He accused her vocal. The councilman shoved dancers toward the statue. Beg. Beg for forgiveness. As prayers echoed, Marguerite lurched to the statue's base. Her bleeding palm smeared the pedestal as she rasped. He's laughing. Klaus pulled her back, but not before her Vogel struck her. Blasphemer. Frau Trophia's finale. In the chaos, Frau Trophia slipped away. They found her at the forest's edge, dancing with eerie grace beneath the moon. For a heartbeat, her movements softened, a waltz with death. Then she folded like cut string, a ghost of a smile on her lips. Sister Clara placed a poppy on her chest. Rest now, she lied. The march home. Survivors numbered 23. Klaus carried Marguerite, her breath shallow as a wounded bird's. Lena watched Gerhard scribble notes, his hands trembling. We've achieved nothing, she said. His reply was hollow. We've proven superstition kills faster than disease. As Strasbourg's gates appeared, a new sound sliced the dawn, singing not hymns, a discordant, feverish choir rising from the corn-marked. The plague hadn't burned out. It had evolved. Strasbourg is unrecognizable. The corn-marked overflows with hundreds of singers-dancers, their voices weaving a cacophonous spell. Klaus discovers Marguerite's diary, its pages hinting at a dark pact buried in Frau Trophia's past. Below the cathedral, a disgraced alchemist hears the singing and smiles. The true puppeteer emerges. Part 7. The Hymn of Stone and Shadow. The unholy chorus. Strasbourg's summer air thickened with the scent of decay and discord. The corn-marked had transformed into a Boschian hellscape. Dancers twitched like marionettes on blood-slicked stones, their skeletal forms casting long, jagged shadows under the moon. Among them, Marguerite stood apart. Her once melodic humming had erupted into a guttural shriek that cracked the stillness, a sound like grinding tombstones. When the mob's stone struck her temple, she fell, only to rise moments later, eyes black as obsidian, blood painting her face in macabre streaks. Her scream shattered every window facing the square. The silence after the shriek was worse than the sound itself. 300 dancers froze mid-step. Even the wind held its breath. Then, as one, they turned toward Marguerite. Their lips parted in unison, whispering a single word that slithered through the square. Mother. 2. The council's last gamble. Inside the Rathaus, Lord Mayor Bachmann crumpled Roth's proposal for witch pyres. Burn the city? You'd make us monsters. He hissed. Master Gerhard intervened, holding up a vial of mercury-swirling blood. This is no demon. It's in their veins, a poison or something older. Sister Clara, frail but resolute, placed the phantom poppy from her vision on the table. It's a key, she insisted. The dance opens a door. We must close it before the blood moon rises. Desperate, Bachmann ordered the unthinkable. The cathedral sealed. Guards barred the great doors, ignorant of the Undercroft's geometric dancers now scratching at the stone from below. The starving isolated. Healthy citizens were forced into quarantine districts, bread rationed to husks. The pilgrimage reversed. A decree. All dancers would be taken back to Savern, this time in iron cages. 3. Klaus and the Whispering Walls. Klaus navigated the cathedral's catacombs, torch trembling in his grip. The humming had crystallized into a voice, cold, ancient, echoing from the cracked sarcophagus. Flesh is a prison. Rhythm is the lockpick. As geometric dancers circled the tomb, Their movements carved glowing sigils into the floor. Klaus spotted Marguerite's shawl, snagged on a tomb, the same wool she'd worn the day the plague began. The voice sharpened. Dash, she is the vessel. Bring her to us. A dancer's head snapped toward Klaus, its mouth unhinged, revealing not teeth but spiraling darkness. He fled, the whispers pursuing him. Dash, run, little rat. The conductor arrives. 4. The Red Poppy Prophecy. Sister Clara knelt in the corn market, pressing a damp cloth to a dying boy's brow. As his breath faded, a crimson poppy sprouted through the cobblestone by his hand, its petals unfurling in seconds. She touched it, and the vision returned. A field of poppies under a black sun. The faceless figure stood now at a stone archway swirling with stars. Its whisper was a blade. Dash, Vitus lies. The saint is the lock. The dancer is the key. Sacrifice her before the moon bleeds, or the door opens forever. Clara knew Marguerite was both savior and sacrifice. V. The baker's last dance. Hans, the once jovial baker, had become a grotesque parody of life. His feet were raw bone, yet he danced, twirling with Marguerite, as her shriek subsided into a low, resonant drone. He rasped to Klaus, who'd pushed through the crowd to reach them. Dash, can't stop. It's in the grain. The ergot Dash, they baked it into the bread of the dead Dash. Before he could finish, his heart burst. Hans died mid-pirouette, collapsing into Marguerite's arms. As his last breath left him, Marguerite's eyes cleared. For one lucid moment, she locked eyes with Klaus and whispered, Dash, the stones, singing, under the cathedral. Then the blackness flooded back. She dropped Hans' corpse and resumed dancing, her tempo doubling. 6. The Convergence. At midnight, 3 horrors coincided. 1. The blood moon rose, casting Strasbourg in crimson light. 2. The Undercroft opened. Stone groaned as the geometric dancers erupted from the cathedral's foundations, moving toward the corn market in flawless, silent sync. 3. Marguerite's ascension. She levitated, suspended above the square, her hair whipping like storm clouds. Sigils glowed on her skin, mirroring the catacomb carvings. The city held its breath as the two groups converged, the broken, gasping dancers of the square and the cold, precise ones from below. Marguerite's voice split the sky, a choir of nightmares. Dash, the door stands open. Let the music of the void begin. Dash, Strasbourg had become a living wound. Above, Marguerite hung like a blasphemous angel, her body a bridge between worlds. Below, the stone dancers knelt, offering their geometric silence to her chaos. And deep in the earth, the sarcophagus yawned wide, waiting. The plague was never a curse, dear listener. It was an invitation. And as the blood moon swelled, the guest prepared to step through. Part 8. The Blood Moon's Bargain. The corn market was a canvas of nightmares. Under the swollen blood moon, hundreds moved in a geometric trance, limbs snapping at unnatural angles, throats humming a chord that vibrated in the bones of the city. At the center, Marguerite hung suspended in the air, wreathed in tendrils of darkness that siphoned the dancer's life force into a growing void above her. The air tasted of iron and decay. Sister Clara stood at the edge of the maelstrom, the prophecy's parchment crumpled in her bloodless grip. Dash, the key dances under the blood moon. To close the door demands sacrifice, the key's life, or a vessel of pure faith offered under the void. Beside her, Father Jacob prayed frantically, while Master Lena brandished a lancet. Cut her down, Clara. In the key, in the plague. Klaus's roar cut through the hum. He broke past guards, surging toward Marguerite. She's not a demon, she's trapped. Dash. Guards wrestled him down, his face pressed to cobblestone slick with dancer's blood. His eyes locked on Clara's, desperate. Don't kill her. Please, Dash. Councilman Gottfried staggered forward, wild-eyed. Burn the witch. Burn her now, or we all die. Above them, the void pulsed, drinking the dancer's strength. One by one, they dissolved into shadow husbands, mothers, children, their essences funneling into the abyss. Marguerite's body arched, a marionette of the void. Her voice, thin as cracked ice, pierced the din. Sister, help me. The blood moon reached its zenith. Time bled away. Sister Clara saw two paths: Marguerite's death, or the prophecy's cryptic alternative, a vessel of pure faith. Klaus's love was pure. Her own faith, tested but unbroken, was pure. But what does the void crave, she realized? Not light despair. Not faith fear. She snatched Lena's lancet. Not toward Marguerite. Not toward Klaus. She plunged the blade into her own palm. Blood, black in the moonlight, welled hot and thick. You hunger for suffering? Clara screamed, thrusting her bleeding hand into the vortex's edge. Then take mine. Take my faith, my life, but spare the key. Golden light erupted from her wound, a searing counterpoint to the void's hunger. The darkness recoiled like a scalded beast. The geometric dance fractured. Dancers stumbled, gasping as the compulsion snapped. The void shrieked, a soundless rupture in reality, as Clara's offering repelled it. Marguerite fell. Klaus surged free, catching her before she shattered on the stones. Above them, the abyss collapsed inward, vanishing with a thunderclap of silence. The blood moon faded to ash gray. In the sudden stillness, the dancers blinked, trembling. Then, like cut strings, they collapsed. The corn-marked became a sea of heaving chests and bewildered sobs. The plague had ended. Klaus cradled Marguerite, her breathing shallow but steady. Father Jacob clutched Clara as her knees buckled. The golden light in her palm dimmed to a scar. "What did you do?" whispered Master Gerhard, kneeling beside them. Clara smiled faintly. "I offered what it could not digest." Her gaze drifted to Klaus, weeping into Marguerite's hair. Faith without despair and love without fear. But as the survivors stirred, shadows pooled thicker where the void had been. Deep below the cathedral, the open sarcophagus yawned, empty. Strasbourg is a city of ghosts. Survivors bury the dead, but the trauma runs deeper. Dancers with hollow eyes, children who hum in their sleep, and whispers that the void still watches. Sister Clara's scar pulses with residual power. Marguerite awakens with no memory of the plague, only nightmares of the door. And when Klaus finds a single blood-red poppy growing from the cornmark's cracks, he knows the sacrifice was not enough. Beneath the cathedral, the empty sarcophagus begins to whisper. Part 9, The Ashes of Ecstasy. The silence that descended upon Strasbourg was profound. It wasn't the quiet of peace, but the heavy, gasping stillness after a scream. The frantic drumming of hundreds of feet, the discordant symphony of voices lifted in unnatural song, the groans of exhaustion and the crackle of the void's oppressive energy, all had ceased. Only the wind whistled through the deserted corn-market, stirring dust and the discarded red petals of poppies that seemed to have bloomed overnight amidst the chaos. The air tasted of ozone, sweat, and something metallic, like old blood. In the center of the square, Marguerite lay cradled in Klaus's arms, trembling but alive. Her eyes, once dark pools reflecting the abyss, were now wide with human terror and profound confusion. She stared at her own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. Klaus wept openly, his rough face buried in her hair, murmuring broken words of thanks and love. Around them, dancers slumped where they had fallen, some unconscious, others weeping silently or staring vacantly into the dawn light that now crept over the rooftops. Many simply did not rise. Sister Clara stood a few paces away, swaying slightly. The golden light that had pulsed from the wound on her palm had faded, leaving behind a scar that seemed etched in fine, shimmering filigree. She felt hollowed out, drained beyond measure, yet thrumming with a strange, quiet energy. The pain in her hand was a distant echo, overshadowed by the sheer, overwhelming relief of the silence. Her gaze swept the devastated square, the broken bodies, the expressions of vacant horror, the sheer scale of human wreckage. Her prayer had been answered, but at a cost she was only beginning to fathom. Her faith felt reforged, tempered in the crucible of the void, but it was heavier now. She saw the lingering shadows, thinner but still present, clinging to the edges of buildings, pooling in doorways. The door hadn't fully closed. The weight of survival. The days that followed were a blur of grim necessity. The stunned city council, its members pale and shaken, emerged from their chambers. The pragmatic Master Gerhard, stripped of his scientific arrogance, worked alongside the pious and equally humbled Master Tobias to organize relief. Wagons were commandeered to collect the dead, dozens, perhaps hundreds, succumbing to heart failure, stroke, sheer exhaustion, or injuries sustained in their frenzied dance. The toll was staggering. Makeshift infirmaries sprung up in guild halls and churches, overflowing with the injured and the traumatized. Physicians bled patients for fever and exhaustion. Apothecaries mixed calming draughts of valerian and poppy, but the deepest wounds were invisible. Marguerite was carried, mute and trembling, to a quiet room near the infirmary. Klaus refused to leave her side. He washed her face, spooned broth between her lips, held her hand as she flinched at every sudden sound. She spoke little, her voice a hoarse whisper. When she did speak, it was of fragmented nightmares, the pull of the music that wasn't music, the feeling of the cold void pouring through her, the terrifying ecstasy that had consumed her soul. Klaus listened, his own heart breaking anew with each fragmented confession. He saw the shadow in her eyes, the echo of the thing that had used her, and a cold dread settled in his stomach. Was it truly gone? Hans the baker survived, but his leg, broken during the pilgrimage and aggravated in the final dance, would leave him with a permanent limp. His bakery was ashes, looted during the chaos. He sat in the infirmary, staring at the wall, the boisterous spirit that had defined him utterly extinguished. His wife was among the dead. Elsbeth, the seamstress, tended to the wounded with quiet efficiency, her own face drawn with grief for her lost friends and the innocence of her city. She avoided looking at the corn market. The council's fractured resolve. The council chamber was thick with the smell of fear and unspoken accusations. Mayor Schott, his authority brittle, presided over a divided body. Master Reinhardt, faction, superstition, and fear. This was witchcraft, pure and simple. That woman, Trophia, was the spark, and Marguerite became its vessel. We must root out the conspirators. The burnings must begin. Look at the shadows. They cling like cobwebs. The demon is merely wounded, not slain. He slammed a fist on the table, his eyes darting nervously towards the windows. Master Gerhard, faction, pragmatism, and secular order. Burnings? Madness. This was a sickness of the mind, exacerbated by famine, fear, and the council's own folly in encouraging the dance. We need order, sanitation, and isolation for the afflicted until their humors rebalance. We must rebuild, not indulge in more hysteria. He glared at Reinhardt, his usual composure frayed. Master Tobias, faction, faith, and penance. This was the judgment of God and Saint Vitus, averted only by divine intervention through Sister Clara's sacrifice. We must dedicate the city anew. Days of fasting, penitential processions, the construction of a new chapel to Saint Vitus on the very spot where the demon was cast out. It is God's mercy we must seek, not scapegoats. He clutched his rosary tightly. The others, murmurs rippled. Some leaned towards Reinhardt's call for purge, others towards Gerhard's practicality. Still others were paralyzed by indecision. The shadow of the void, the impossible events they had witnessed, made rational governance seem like building on quicksand. Mayor Schott raised a trembling hand. Enough. The people are broken. The harvest is neglected. Disease threatens in the filth. We must present unity, however fractured we are within. He turned to a weary clerk. Decrees. All bodies to be buried outside the city walls by dusk. The corn market is to be cleansed with lye and holy water. Food stores are to be distributed under guard. A curfew is imposed at sundown, and a day of mourning and prayer is declared. He avoided mentioning Sister Clara, Marguerite, or the nature of the plague. Official silence was his shield. We will restore order. But order felt like a thin veneer over a gaping wound. Whispers in the crypt and the golden scar. Klaus, driven by a gnawing unease he couldn't suppress, waited until the deep watches of the night. He slipped past the exhausted guards posted near the infirmary where Marguerite slept fitfully and made his way towards the towering silhouette of the cathedral. The great doors, usually barred, stood slightly ajar, perhaps left so in the chaos, perhaps by design. The cavernous interior was pitch black, the smell of incense replaced by dust and something colder, older. He lit a small tallow lamp. His footsteps echoed as he descended worn stone steps into the crypt. The air grew colder, damper. He reached the central chamber. The scene from his earlier, terrified glimpse was confirmed, but altered. The intricate, geometric pattern drawn in ash and what looked like dried, dark blood was smudged, partially scuffed as if by frantic feet. The heavy stone lid of the ancient, unnamed sarcophagus lay shattered on the floor. The sarcophagus itself was empty, utterly, chillingly empty. Not a bone, not a shroud, not a speck of dust remained inside. It was as if whatever had lain there had simply departed, or been released. A cold dread, deeper than any he'd felt during the plague itself, seized Klaus. The void hadn't just been repelled. Something else had been disturbed, awakened, or perhaps even invited. He backed away slowly, the lamp flickering wildly, casting monstrous, dancing shadows on the vaulted ceiling. The whispers weren't just in the city above. They seemed to coil up from the very stones beneath his feet. Meanwhile, Sister Clara found herself an unwilling figure of reverence. The survivors, especially those who had been near the center of the final maelstrom, spoke in hushed tones of the nun who faced the demon and bled golden light. They pointed to her scarred hand. Some knelt as she passed, reaching out to touch the hem of her habit, seeking a blessing, a fragment of the power that had saved them. It filled her with profound discomfort. She sought solace in the small, damaged chapel attached to her convent, praying before a statue of the Virgin Mary, its face scarred by a flying stone during the chaos. The abbess, a stern woman named Hildegard, approached her. Her usual severity was tempered by awe and a hint of fear. "Sister Clara," the abbess began, her voice low. "The city speaks of miracles, of your sacrifice." Her eyes flickered to Clara's scarred hand. "The council, they are wary. Master Reinhardt calls it witchcraft. Master Tobias calls it sainthood. Both extremes are dangerous." She paused. "What was it, sister? What did you face? And what does this mark mean?" Clara looked at her palm, the golden scar pulsing faintly with a warmth only she could feel. "I faced hunger, Reverend Mother," she said softly, her voice raw. "A hunger older than sin, that feeds on despair. I offered it something else. Faith. Not just mine, but the pure, desperate love Klaus held for Marguerite. It was that love, as much as prayer, that turned the key." She closed her hand into a fist, hiding the scar. "This mark, it is a reminder, a seal. The door is not fully shut. The hunger, it tasted this world, and it remembers." She met the abbess's gaze, her own eyes filled with a sorrowful certainty. The shadows remain, the unanswered question and the lingering chill. A week after the silence fell, a fragile semblance of routine attempted to reassert itself. Markets opened, hesitantly. Farmers brought meager supplies under heavy guard. Hammers tentatively sounded on repairs. But the laughter was gone. Eyes darted nervously, especially towards the corn market, now scrubbed raw but still avoided. People jumped at loud noises. Mothers clutched children tighter. The name Marguerite was spoken only in fearful whispers. The dancer, they called her now, a title laden with dread. Klaus took Marguerite away from the infirmary, renting a small, secluded room on the city's edge. He found work hauling debris. Marguerite sat by the window, staring out at the scarred city, her fingers often tracing invisible patterns on the sill. Sometimes, Klaus would catch her humming, a fragment of that terrible, compelling melody that had bound the plague. She would stop instantly, her face paling with terror when she realized what she was doing. The void's echo was within her, a dormant poison. Sister Clara walked the streets, offering comfort, tending the sick, her presence a beacon of calm that slowly began to mend frayed spirits. Yet, wherever she went, she felt the lingering shadows brush against the edges of her awareness. They were weaker, yes, dispersed, but they were their dash. Observing, waiting. The golden scar on her palm would sometimes throb, a silent alarm. One evening, as she walked near the river, she saw a single, perfect red poppy growing from a crack in the cobblestones. It hadn't been there that morning. It stood vibrant against the gray stone, a splash of impossible color. She knelt beside it. It was just a flower. And yet, Frau Trophia had died with a poppy blooming beside her. This felt like a sign, a reminder, not of death, but of the strange, persistent life that endured even in the cracks of devastation. But also, perhaps, a marker, a beacon. For what? Or for whom? She looked up at the cathedral, its spires piercing the twilight sky. Klaus's discovery in the crypt weighed heavily on her mind. The empty sarcophagus, the geometric pattern. The plague hadn't been random. It had been a key, a ritual interrupted but perhaps not entirely failed. The dancing had opened a door, and something had stepped through before she slammed it shut. Something that now walked unseen among the shadows of Strasbourg. Something that had tasted the world and found it appetizing. The dancing plague was over. The immediate horror had passed. But Strasbourg was forever changed. Its streets held ghosts beyond the dead, ghosts of ecstatic despair, ghosts of an ancient hunger, and the ghost of an unanswered question. What walked out of the crypt? The silence was no longer just the absence of dance. It was the quiet before an unseen storm. The void had been denied its feast, but the shadows remained, patient and cold, clinging to the stones of the wounded city, waiting for the next note in a song only they could hear. Strasbourg rebuilds, but scars run deep. Years pass. Marguerite and Klaus try to build a life haunted by the past. Sister Clara's golden scar becomes a legend and a target. The empty sarcophagus whispers secrets to those who dare listen. And when whispers of strange occurrences begin in a distant village, unexplained fits, compulsive humming, a now-aged Sister Clara knows the shadows never left. They only slept. The final confrontation draws near, not just for Strasbourg, but for the soul of the future. The legacy of the dance must be settled, once and for all. Part 10, Where Shadows Sleep. Autumn's Breath, Strasbourg, October 1518. The air in Strasbourg was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves. A year had passed since the blood moon, yet the city wore its recovery like a poorly mended cloak, functional, but with frayed edges. In the corn market, where hundreds had once danced to their graves, a simple stone memorial now stood. Townsfolk hurried past it, eyes averted, as if the names carved there might summon ghosts. Marguerite stood at the bakery window, flour dusting her apron like snow. Outside, children chased a stray dog, their laughter too sharp, too loud. She flinched, her fingers tightening on the dough. Rhythm dash, she thought. Always the rhythm dash. Even now, in silence, her muscles remembered the pull of the void. Klaus appeared beside her, his calloused hand covering hers. "The ovens are ready," he murmured. His voice was steady, but his gaze lingered on her face, watching for the distant look that still stole over her when memories surged. They had married in spring, a quiet ceremony overshadowed by unspoken fears. The bakery, the rising loaf, was their refuge. Flour, yeast, fire, tangible things to anchor them. "Will you deliver to the chapel today?" Klaus asked, kneading bread with forced calm. Marguerite nodded. Sister Clara had retreated to a small chapel beyond the city walls, tending a garden of blood-red poppies that bloomed unervingly through frost. Her golden scar, visible beneath her wimple, had become a beacon. Some called her a saint, others a witch who'd bargained with darkness. In the Rathaus, Burgermeister Fischer scowled at a stack of reports. The plague had been subdued, not erased. Grain shortages had worsened. Suspicion festered. Burn the survivors, one faction urged. Isolate them, insisted another. Fisher had compromised. A nightly curfew, guards posted at every well, and whispers of spies sent to watch Sister Clara. Fear, he knew, was a more contagious plague than dance. Beneath the cathedral, the crypt remained sealed, iron bars welded shut, thresholds sprinkled with salt and dried poppies. But workers repairing the nave spoke of cold spots and faint, rhythmic tapping from below. 2. The crypt's echo. Klaus volunteered for the cathedral repairs. He told Marguerite it was for extra coin, but truthfully, he needed to face the place where Marguerite had almost been lost. As he replaced shattered stained glass, his hammer strikes echoed too loudly in the vaulted silence. One evening, as dusk bled through the rose window, Klaus heard it. A hum. Not the mad singing of the plague, but a low, resonant vibration that made his teeth ache. It came from beneath the flagstones. He found Sister Clara in her chapel garden, bathed in the scar's soft glow. She knelt among poppies, their petals like droplets of old blood. "It's back," Klaus said, voice raw. "The crypt, it's alive." Sister Clara plucked a poppy. Its stem oozed sap like ink. "Not alive. Hungry." The void left an echo, a scar on this world, just as I bear one. She pressed the flower into his palm. "It feeds on regret, on all we couldn't heal." Klaus thought of Marguerite's nightmares, the way she sometimes traced invisible patterns on her skin. "Can you stop it?" "Only by joining it," she whispered. "The light in me is the key. To seal the crypt, I must become the lock." 3. The last sacrifice. That night, Sister Clara returned to the cathedral alone. The crypt entrance yawned open, the salt scattered, the iron bars twisted like melted wax. Cold air seeped out, smelling of damp stone and something older, ozone and void. She descended. The chamber was unchanged. The geometric dancer's scorch marks still marred the floor, circling the central sarcophagus. Now, though, the stone lid glowed with a sickly violet light. From within came the hum, deeper now, harmonizing with the pulse of her scar. "You returned." A voice echoed, not in sound, but in her bones. It was the void's residue, a shadow of its hunger. "You owe us a debt." One soul was not enough. Images flooded her. Frau Trophia collapsing in the Savern shrine, Hans's hollow eyes as he danced, Marguerite levitating, a puppet of the abyss. Strasbourg's pain, its fear, had nourished this place for centuries. "The debt ends tonight," Sister Clara said. She pressed her scarred palm to the sarcophagus. Golden light flared, battling the violet pulse. Stone cracked. The hum rose to a shriek. "You cannot cleanse this. You are made of the same despair." "I am made of faith." She breathed. "And faith is love that refuses despair." With a surge of will, she channeled every prayer, every fragile hope she'd nurtured in her garden. The scar blazed like a sun. Light poured into the sarcophagus, searing the violet away. The stone sealed itself with a thunderous snap. The crypt fell silent. Sister Clara slumped, her scar dimming to embers. As the last light faded, a single poppy bloomed at her feet. Then she was gone, not vanished, but unmade. Her essence woven into the crypt's new seal. Only the poppy remained, glowing faintly in the dark. 4. The bread and the bloom. Spring came early in 1519. On a clear April morning, Marguerite and Klaus walked to Sister Clara's chapel. They carried a loaf of rye bread, its crust braided like intertwined fingers. The chapel door hung open. Inside, wild poppies had burst through the floorboards, carpeting the space in crimson. No trace of Sister Clara remained, only serenity and the faint scent of honey. Marguerite placed the bread beside the tallest poppy. "She saved us," she whispered. "But who saved her, Dash?" Klaus took her hand. "We did, by living." Marguerite hummed then, a gentle, wordless lullaby. Not the plague's compulsive rhythm, but a melody of her own making. Klaus joined in, his baritone a steady anchor. For a moment, the poppies seemed to sway, not in madness, but in quiet benediction. As they left, Marguerite didn't look back. The ghost of a dance still lived in her steps, but now it was a choice. V. Epilogue. Whispers through time. By 1520, Strasbourg had scrubbed itself raw of the past. The plague entered records as Curia Sancti Viti, St. Vitus dance. Physicians blamed overheated blood, priests, divine punishment. The dead were buried. The scarred survivors learned to hide their tremors. Burgermeister Fischer banned all mention of curses or voids. Yet on still nights, parents hushed children with tales of the dancing dead. Sleep, they'd whisper, or the red poppies will sing you away. In the cathedral crypt, workers reported the stones warm to the touch. Poppies bloomed in cracks no seed could reach. Some swore they smelled fresh bread near the sealed entrance. And in a small bakery, Marguerite kneaded dough, her movements fluid, deliberate. Klaus watched her, his heart full. Outside, a street musician played a lute. The tune was lively, infectious. Marguerite paused. For a heartbeat, her shoulders tensed, a phantom pull. Then she laughed, the sound bright as chapel glass, and tossed flour at Klaus. The music played on, but now it was just music. Strasbourg survived. The dancing plague of 1518 faded into history, a footnote of the bizarre. Yet centuries later, we still ask, what caused it? Mass hysteria? Ergot poisoning? Or something older, hungrier, a darkness that sleeps beneath the surface of our world, waiting for despair to crack the seal? We may never know. After all, history is a dance of shadows and light, and some truths whirl forever out of reach. For now, dear listener, let the mystery linger. Sleep, but never too deeply. Part 10 ties all threads. Clara's sacrifice resolves the supernatural thread. Klaus and Marguerite find tentative peace. Strasbourg's recovery mirrors historical records, where the plague abruptly ended. The lingering poppies and crypt warmth honor the ambiguity. Was it faith, science, or something else that saved them? Thank you for wandering these haunted streets with us.